the Fearless Money Management Podcast, where we empower women to take control of their finances. I'm your host, Claire Strong, and today I'm chatting with financial expert Lisa Risser, who's also a certified CPA. And today's topic is going to be all about debt management. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Claire. How are you?
I am doing good. How about you?
Doing pretty well.
Well, that's always good to know. I know you're like the world's busiest woman. You're always traveling and working. So I love our little chats, actually, Lisa. You know what I would describe our chat as? You do. You ground me. You refocus me. I feel good after our podcast. I'm like, oh, yes, I'm on track. I know what I'm doing. I've got this. So, So you are my life advisor is how I would categorize you, actually, Lisa. But today's episode is a really important one because I've been in this situation before. So we're going to discuss debt, basically, and how to manage it. And this is just the most stressful situation for many of us, especially women, especially mums, because we just have so much on our plate. And to add debt into that mix it's just awful. I've been there. And so what I want to do first of all, Lisa, because it is such a big subject, let's talk about the different types of debt, because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are some good debts and some really bad ones that we just want to get rid of. So what are the different types of debt?
So there is good debt, and there's bad debt that we know. And it's important to know the difference. And as women, like you said, we don't pay attention to this quite often because we're so busy taking care of the family and the house and the kids and everything else that we don't pay attention to this. But if we just pay attention in small pieces of this, it can make a big difference. And so we're going to talk first, as we talked about today, you mentioned about debt. And we'll first start off the difference between good debt and bad debt. So good debt would be debt that is considered an investment in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, when you get a mortgage on a house, you have debt, but that house is an asset that will appreciate over time and should continue to grow in value. So the debt is actually an investment. And that's what we call good debt, as long as you can manage that debt. There's been issues, and one of the things that's happened in the past, and one of the big contributors in 2008 with the Great Recession was a lot of people getting into too much debt with their mortgages and then not being able to afford them when housing prices did go down. So you want to be careful that you can actually financially manage the debt that you have. But overall, a mortgage would be considered a good debt because it's an investment in an asset. Another example of a good debt would be student loans. Because student loans, they're an investment in your future or in your child's future. And again, though, even though they're considered good debt, you want to be careful how much you are actually taking in student loans or your child is taking out in student loans. We've heard that there's been so much discussion in the news about student loans, and especially in the past year. And there have been people that are 80 years old and they've still been paying off their student loans. And so you want to be really careful how much that is. And it might be something for a future podcast just to talk about all of the issues relative to putting someone through college and what the student loans are and options are and so forth, because it can be, that in itself can be overwhelming. But if you have a reasonable amount of student loans, it's good. It's a good investment.
Okay. We are definitely going to do another episode on that because I am fast approaching the stage where my eldest is going to be going to university. And so I need your help with this, Lisa. So mums listening to this, if your child is approaching college age, we've got you. We're going to actually focus an entire episode on that. So I'm really looking forward to that one. And so, so good debt then is debt that, as long as you can afford it, is going to either be an asset like a house or an investment in either your future or your child's future, for example? Is that kind of how we would categorize a good debt? Okay. Now, obviously, with regards to a mortgage, as you alluded to, it can be catastrophic if you aren't able to keep those payments. And again, maybe we do a different episode on that. But okay, so good debts. What are bad debts then? I mean, I have an idea, like, I don't know, is a store card a bad debt, for example?
Well, that's exactly right. Any debt that is a high interest debt, especially consumer debt, like credit cards, they can be financially detrimental. And first of all, they're not typically debt that you have for an asset that's going to appreciate in value and grow in value. It's not an investment. They tend to be on purchases, our everyday purchases. It could be clothes, it could be whatever it is that we're spending on. And especially on the credit cards, because those interest rates are so high and they just don't seem to be going down. And that's why they're considered to be bad debt. And that's what you really want to pay the most attention to, is how much of that type of quote unquote bad debt do you actually have?
Okay, now I just want to stop you there because I'm a little confused. So I get the concept that things like credit cards, store cards, if misused, can be bad debt. But here's the thing. So I moved over to the US from the UK and I didn't have any credit history. So I was really struggling to get the most basic credit card, or even, I'd go into somewhere like Home Goods and I couldn't even, get their store card because I had no credit history. So as a way to build up my own credit history, I did take out a very small credit card. And so that is helping me because I now have some credit history. So here's what I want to ask you, Lisa. Is it good to have credit cards if you are paying them off in a responsible way? Because without it, I guess you don't have any credit history, do you? I mean, how do you go about building a healthy credit score if you don't have credit in the first place?
That's such a good point because, and I think having another episode, maybe just talking about this, because I'm going through this. My kids are, one just graduated from college and one's still in college. And how do you get them to get the credit scores and get their credit started without having a credit card is difficult. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to get that credit. If you have a credit card and you maintain a low balance, if you could pay it off every month, that's your ideal. And if you can't, at least try to make sure that you have your balance as low as you possibly can and pay as much as you can on it as possible, because that high interest rate, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And the biggest problem is when you have a high credit card balance and you can only afford the minimum payments, you're just never going to get there. You're never going to get that paid off. And it just keeps going on and on and on and just grows. And that becomes completely overwhelming at some point in time. So having a credit card by itself isn't a bad thing. It's whether or not and how soon you can pay that credit card off.
So it's interesting because I was brought up back in the UK in a household where credit cards were seen as like an evil. So, if you have a credit card, it's going to lead to debt. It wasn't, and it was, you only put emergency things on a credit card. Now, fast forward to now, I'm married to someone who is pretty financially literate. Actually, he spent a lot of time, teaching himself, reading stuff, and he's very invested and he's very meticulous with the family's finances. But one thing he does, and this shocked me because my mum and dad, kind of brought me up to believe that credit cards were kind of a bad thing. And, you only use credit cards if you people that use credit cards generally don't have the money available. So they put it on their credit card, but then they get into this vicious circle because they're not able to pay it off. Whereas my husband, we use our credit cards for everyday expenses. Like everything goes on the credit card, but then it's cleared. The balance is cleared in full every month. And I guess one of the reasons he likes to do it like that is, with Alaska, for example, one of the credit cards is with Alaska. Well, you get air miles, and then that translates to free flights. And the same with American Express. They have some sort of incentive program. And so that's how he does things. So he, like I say, the groceries, every expense really is put on the credit cards, but they are cleared every month. And that was just a very different approach to me. So are you saying that is how credit cards should be used? More of a, you're only going to spend on them what you're able to pay off?
That's ideal. I mean, a lot of people can't do that. They can't afford that. But that's where you want to get to. You'd really like to have your credit card balances as low as possible. Ideally, if you can, charge everything on a credit card and get all those benefits you're talking about. You can get miles, you can get discounts on certain things. You've got all kinds of other benefits that you can use that for, buy other things. If you can pay off your credit cards every month, that is ideal. One of the things in terms of women and credit cards, we don't have a long history of having our own credit cards. So 50 years ago, women were not allowed in the US to have a credit card on their own. They had to have it with their husband or with somebody else. It could not be, a woman was not allowed to have a credit card on her own. So our mothers didn't have the experience of managing a credit card on their own when we were growing up.
To think it was only 50 years ago. My gosh, that's insane. Yeah.
And I remember my mother when my parents got separated and when I was young, and my mother didn't have any credit because she had no credit cards in her name. And she really, really struggled financially because how can you find a place to live without credit? How can you get a credit card? Because it was not that long after you could get a credit card on your own, but she'd always had it with her husband. So she didn't make the change when the law changed. And it was a struggle for our entire family. And so our mothers didn't have a lot of time, that they were growing up and when they were young, having their own credit cards. And so we want to make sure that we're managing it and looking at this and really appreciate the fact that we have the ability to have credit cards on our own because we didn't always have that. And 50 years is not that long ago that women didn't have the ability to do that.
Is shocking. And that's a nice reminder, actually, for, I guess, us women to not take credit cards for granted because we didn't always have them. And I think that they can be really good things as long as we're staying on top of them. Okay, so, we've categorized then the good and bad debt. So good debt, things like mortgages, loans, student loans in our, whether it's ourselves or our kids. Bad debt is the stuff like credit cards, store cards. Okay. So here's what I want to know. So, for example, I have this small credit card, which I got to try and build my credit up. Doesn't have a very big balance. How should I be paying that off? I mean, should I be clearing it in full, or is there like a sweet spot where, I'm still not going to be charged the silly interest, but maybe I'm not clearing it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Ideally, you want to pay your credit card off every month. And you're still building your credit. Because what they look at in the credit bureaus is they look at your average balance. So your average balance, if you charge everything on there and then you can just pay it off every month, that's the ideal way because you're building up your credit, but you're not paying the interest. So if you can do that, that's exactly what you want to do. The other piece with credit cards is you want to think about whenever you charge on a credit card and you have a balance outstanding, you're not paying it off every month because you can't afford to do that. When you go to buy something, and let's say you go to buy a blouse or something, we don't think about it this way, but I urge everybody to think about it. If that blouse is $50, let's just pretend it's $50. If you're going to use your credit card and you have an outstanding balance and you're paying it off every month, you're paying those high interest rates on your credit card debt. That blouse does not cost you $50. that blouse is costing you significantly more than that because you're adding on the interest rate on top of that credit card that you're going to be paying month after month after month. And maybe think twice about buying that if you can. Now, a lot of people use credit cards for groceries, and you have to eat, and it's not everything. But if you're looking at something that's a want and not a need, and you have an outstanding credit card balance and you can't pay it off every month, just really think a lot more, because whatever that price is for that item or that service, it's costing you a lot more than that. And you can see that if you have a mortgage and you look at the mortgage, and this is a much lower interest rate, but if you look at your mortgage, it can show you how much you'll pay for that mortgage over the lifetime if you got a 30-year mortgage, and it's astounding. Now, that's an investment because you're investing in that house or that condo. But with credit cards, the interest rates are so high, you could be paying double or more for any item you buy on a credit card when you're carrying that balance month after month. And so I think just having that mindset can really help you think twice about using a credit card for something that's not an absolute need when you have outstanding balances.
Gosh, that is a really good way of looking at it. Just, visualizing that item of clothing that you're wanting to buy, but would you pay double the price for it? No, you wouldn't. So then, if you're not going to pay your credit card off in full, maybe it's not a good idea to use that. Okay, so what is the best way to go about paying off our debt? Because this topic's all about debt management. So say we've accumulated credit cards, store cards, whatever it is, how do we go about paying it off? Because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're drowning under bad debt like credit cards.
And it can happen really fast. It can happen so fast. My youngest son is graduating from college in May, and he told me that he wants me to sit down with him and go through his newfound finances once he's working and out of college. And the first thing that I told him was, it doesn't matter your income level. You can spend every penny that you make. And so the things that we're talking about is not just people that are living paycheck to paycheck. People with very good incomes are dealing with credit card debt and on a lot of debt and are overwhelmed with it. So it's at all different socioeconomic levels and different income levels that people are overwhelmed with managing their debt. And the first thing is to assess where you are. And that is to just get a list of all of your debt. Every credit card that you have, hopefully you're not doing payday loans, because that's another one that's significantly high rate of interest. Mortgage, student loans, any sort of debt that you have, car loans, get a list of all of that and identify for each of those what interest rates you have for each of them. Now, credit cards are probably going to be the highest interest rate that you have. So you want to have a list of all your debt and a list of what those interest rates are. And then there's a couple of different ways that you can tackle your debt. One of them is called the snowball method. And that one is actually, you just take the smallest debt first, and then you pay that one off. And then you go to the next smallest one. That's good for people that really need those quick wins. Some people just psychologically, you need the quick win to keep you going. And so if that's really important to you, then just pay the smallest one off. And so then okay, I got one paid off and now I go to the next one. If you want to have the best financial impact on your debt overall, the best thing is to prioritize your debt based on the highest interest rate. So if your credit card debt is the highest interest rate that you have, then start with your highest interest rate credit card and take whatever additional amount above the minimums. So pay the minimum for everything, but that one credit card that you've got, 28% interest rate or whatever it might be, and take any additional amount that you can every month and pay it towards that credit card until that one's done. Once you pay that one off, then go to the next lowest interest rate and take everything that you have, any extra money that you have to pay off debt every month, and put it towards the next one. And you just keep rolling through. That's why they call it an avalanche method. That's overall the most recommended method. But again, if some people are conservative and they just feel like they just get more, they feel more successful if they pay off the smallest debt first, you can do that. The biggest piece is just to start paying as much as you can on your debt as possible, especially, and really that bad debt is what you want to focus on. Once you get the bad debt paid off, which is your high interest credit cards and so forth, then you can start going through and paying off student loans and some of the ones that might have a lower interest rate that isn't necessarily bad debt, but you want to reduce that debt as much as possible.
Okay, so just to recap on that, so your advice is to, depending what you prefer to do or your personal situation, either tackle one of your smallest debts and clear that and keep moving forward, or preferably tackle the one with the highest interest. So whether that's your credit card or your car loan or whatever it is, and get rid of that so you're not paying those extortionate fees. Okay, good. So say that we have actually managed to do this. Oh, actually, one question, Lisa, before we move on. I want to know, if we are struggling to do this on our own, are there things out there? For example, in the UK, if you're really struggling with credit cards or, your bank notices that you're struggling financially, they will offer you debt management programs. And I don't know whether that's a similar thing in the US.
They do. And there's certain services that will help you manage your debt. There's services that will help you consolidate your debt and combine multiple debts into one with a lower interest rate. And so if you're completely overwhelmed and you don't know where to go, and it's just taking over the amount of debt that you have, you can look for some of those services. You want to be careful because there are some services that may say things like don't make any payments and go into default. And that's not really, that then has a significant impact on your credit. So just be careful what some of these different agencies are telling you around that. I don't recommend just doing that type of thing, but there's some really good consolidation services, and they can speak to your credit card companies and your other debtors to help you to try to consolidate into a lower interest rate so that you can get that paid off and start making a lot more momentum on that. Another thing you can do if you have multiple credit cards with very different interest rates, you can always transfer, not always, but quite often you can transfer a high interest credit card balance into a lower interest credit card balance, or sometimes they have introductory rates and so forth. So you can do that as well. You want to make sure you're avoiding adding new debt by doing that. But that's another kind of trick that you can do too, to try to reduce the amount of interest that you're paying every month.
Okay, well, that sounds like good advice. What about staying debt-free? How can we move forward from these situations and stay out of debt? Because the worst thing that could happen is that you manage to pay off that credit card and then literally 3 months later, you're back in the same position. So how do you avoid repeating that vicious circle?
Well, you avoid that by really focusing on making sure that you have a budget and that you stay on track with your budget, that you're cutting out unnecessary expenses and living within your means, if at all possible. We know not everybody can, but if there's even little things you can do to reduce some of your expenses, to do so, and try everything you can just to live within your means so that you don't fall back into that trap, because it's very, very easy to do that. And a lot of people can pay. I've seen people that have paid off their debt and then they get right back into that because now they pay off their debt and they feel like they can go buy some things, and they go buy them and then they rack up, more credit card debt. So it's really having a budget, staying on track, And even after you pay off your debt, then take that money that you're using to pay off your debt and start investing it. And that's really where you want to have your financial growth, is really in investing. But it's hard to do that when you're just overwhelmed with debt and you're just making your minimum payments every month.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I've been there. I've had credit cards that have taken me years to pay off because I wasn't able to do much more than the minimum payment. And it's a really, really depressing cycle to be in. Okay, so anything else that you want to add on this subject that we haven't covered that you think would be really, really useful, particularly for mums and women listening to this?
I think just the fact that just knowing and feeling confident that you can do this and just a little bit at a time starts to make a difference. And just really and thinking about it and sitting down and going through the processes that we just talked about will really help you to pay off that debt faster and make you feel more stable financially, which makes you feel more comfortable and improves your emotional stability and well-being as well.
Yeah, 100%. And Lisa, where can we get hold of resources? Are they going to be on the website? I mean, where can we go for more information if we want to look into this subject in more detail?
Yeah, you can go onto the website and you'll see some links to some information. And a lot of it is links to free resources as well, because there's a lot of free resources out there to help you. And so I would start with those and see how that helps you. And if you need more support and more one-on-one for that, there's links on the website for that as well.
And so that brings us to the end of today's episode of Fearless Money Management. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave us a review. Your support helps us to reach even more amazing women on their journey to financial freedom. Bye for now.